Welcome to the second of our Advent videos as we reflect on Paula Gooder's book, The Meaning is in the Waiting. Last week, Father Brian led us through an introduction to waiting and considered the waiting that we see in Abraham and Sarah. In this second week, we shall, with Gooder, turn to consider two aspects that the prophets reveal to us about the character of waiting. First, on the one hand, Gooder emphasises the way that the prophets look forward with hope to a better time. She cites some of the passages we hear so often in carol services. My favourite is probably Isaiah 11. The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and a fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. But we could add moments of prophetic hopefulness which have spoken to Christians through the ages, even if not specifically about Christmas. I think, say, of Jeremiah chapter 31, which breaks into a moment of promise. The days are coming, surely, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be my God, and they will be my people. But on the other hand, we might quibble that Gooder is presenting the prophets through rather too rosy a filter. Because we know from the rest of our readings during Lent, or if we've ever sat down to read the rest of Jeremiah, that the prophets issue plenty of warnings about the ways that God will correct the Israelites if they do not return to follow God faithfully. Gooder doesn't consider these parts of the prophets as fully as she might, though she does offer some very helpful commentary on the so-called Day of the Lord that the prophets speak of, and which we may well turn to in our discussions. But I'd suggest that we could see those more threatening passages as pointing us to another kind of waiting. Perhaps the most direct parallel is the guilty child slinking home, knowing that they will need to face the music for their misdeeds. Or, somewhat differently, we might think of the experience of waiting for an operation, looking hopefully for a better life to come, but not looking forward to the discomfort that is needed to get us there. Or, if you're very fit and healthy, you might think of the moment before some intense exercise, as you prepare yourself for the coming moments when your muscles will burn and your lungs will feel like they're exploding under pressure. These are all moments where we wait with forbearance. We hope that the bad times will not go on forever. And we know that these bad times may even be necessary to do us good. The prophets speak of both these waitings, waiting with hope for the good time that God has promised, and waiting with forbearance for the difficult times that may build new faithfulness in us. And to turn to my second point, the prophets did not simply speak to a particular people at one moment. They formed a tradition that spanned many generations, crafting warnings and promises that have spoken to generations down the ages and can still speak to us today. We can see this if we consider the prophecy from Isaiah chapter 40 that Gooder mentions and which we often hear at Christmas. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The words are wonderful in their own right, but in the context of what has gone before in Isaiah, they are a bolt from the blue. Because chapter 40 speaks, scholars agree, to the Israelites in exile in Babylon in the 540s or 530s BC. The words are a promise of hope that the exile is over, and that the Israelites will return to Jerusalem. But by contrast, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah speak to a very different context. That's made most clear in chapters 36 to 39. These chapters are not written in the poetry we tend to associate with prophets like Isaiah, but are a prose story. In fact, Isaiah chapters 36 to 39 is almost identical, word for word, with 2 Kings chapters 18 to 20. And in both places, the prose tells of the interactions between King Hezekiah and Isaiah during the siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC by King Sennacherib of Babylon, ending with the fateful moments when King Hezekiah foolishly shows off all Israel's treasures to the envoys from Babylon, and Isaiah warns him that Babylon will be back to conquer. So when we hear of the prophets, we are best not to think of a single person sitting down and writing a series of sayings. The prophetic books are often a series of interactions over an extended time period, perhaps given the name, say Isaiah or Jeremiah, of a founding figure who was particularly influential in setting up that way of thinking. In the case of Isaiah, that time period appears to have been about 2 centuries, between the 8th and 6th centuries BC. The prophets told stories to help Israel make sense of its hope, its despair, its pride and its misfortune. Successive generations took up those stories and used them to make sense of their own situation. That is a pattern that was continued in Jesus' day and which we continue today. So there we have our 2 reflections on the prophets. First, in both the promises and warnings of the prophets, we have models of the waiting that we may be called to at different points in our lives. And second, the prophets form a tradition of pronouncing these promises and warnings that may still speak to us today. I want to finish then with 2 questions that we will pick up at the start of our discussions on Tuesday the 8th of December at 10 a.m. and at 8 p.m. First, what do you hope for? How do those hopes correspond to or map onto God's hopes for the world? Second, the promises we hear in our Christmas services are promises of hope to an oppressed people. They are promises of liberation, of release from exile, of a new start. How far do you feel yourself to be in the same place? And if not, what are the promises of hope that you need to hear this Advent? Thank you for watching.